Hello and welcome back to the series Masters of the Chessboard. In this series we are going through Richard Reti's famous book Masters of the Chessboard, looking at each of his games one at a time and Reti's analysis of these games. This is the second game where we are looking at Tarrasch's games, and his opponent in this game is Georg Marco. Now here, Tarrasch starts off with e4, e5, knight f3, and we have our first Petrov defense with knight f6, or the first Russian game, as you might call it. Reti is actually quite critical of this move, stating that here this move is played by black in an attempt to try and attack the e4 pawn, when actually it should be white who is attacking and black should be defending because black has got the second move. However, although Reti is critical of this move, we have seen it played in the Carlsen and Caruana World Championship and the Jan Nepomniachtchi and Carlsen World Championship as well, so it's certainly nothing to be frowned upon. Now here, Tarrasch took on e5. Reti prefers the move d4 because he says that white has the first move, so it's usually in white's advantage to try and open up the position with d4, especially if it's not going to be at loss of tempo, because an open game would suit the player whose move it is. However, knight takes e5 was played, and this is the choice of Carlsen in both of the recent World Championships. So I believe this is the most critical try as well. So certainly nothing to be frowned upon. Now here we have d6, pushing the knight away. Knight takes e4, queen e2 is potentially really quite dangerous. Play might continue with something like queen e7. After queen takes e4, d6, d4, de, de. White's a pawn up and has a pawn in the centre, but black is potentially able to try and attack it, and then we can try and pin and get ready to castle. Play can continue in quite a few different ways, but this is not really a common move. There's some theory around it now, I think, but it's not that common at all. d6 is one of the main moves here. White naturally retreats. Then we have knight takes e4, and now d4. This is the main line, playing d4. You could transpose into an exchange French with d3, knight back, d4, d5, and we're now into an exchange French. That would occur after this. This is the same position we just had. So exchange French can occur after d3, knight back, d4, but instead the main move is d4 straight away, immediately staking your claim in the centre. Now here black responds with bishop to e7. The main move is d5 in this position. Bishop e7 has been played in a few master games, but not very often. I'm just looking at chess.com's master game database. d5 has been played 6,100 times. Bishop e7 has been played 300 times. So d5, without a doubt, the main move in this position. And here, the main play of white is to try and undermine this knight on e4, whilst black is hoping to try and keep this knight on e4 and keep control of the e4 square. It's this e4 square which the opening has to focus on. So white might play bishop d3, c4 to attack this pawn, knight c3 to attack the knight, and so everything will be about whether white has to retreat this knight or exchange it away, or whether black can keep this knight on e4. except we don't see d5, we see bishop to e7. Reti comments that this is just an attempt. Here, with this move, black isn't trying to fight for the e4 square at all. They're basically ignoring this e4 square. And now, just as Tarrasch's predecessors, like in the Anderson games and the Steinitz games and the Morphy games, all of his predecessors were able to punish bad decisions like this. We now see how Tarrasch punishes a bad decision like bishop e7. So he continues with bishop to d3, developing the bishop with a tempo. The knight's forced back, and now castles. We have castles, and now h3. And Reti comments that Tarrasch quite liked this h3 move. It serves two purposes. One is to prevent bishop g4 pinning the knight to the queen, and the other is to try and get a potential g4 push later on in the game to start a bit of a kingside attack and kingside initiative. Now here we see bishop to e6, and now c4. And we see this bishop to e6 maneuver and c4. Tarrasch starts to gain space and tries to start limiting his opponent's pieces. This bishop can't go to f5 because it'll be taken. It can't go to here, and now it also can't go to here. So you see Tarrasch starts to gain space and restrict his opponent's passive position. Now here we see c6, and now knight to g5. This knight to g5 move is made with the intention of pushing f4 to try and further restrict his opponent's pieces. See knight a6, knight to c3, developing the knight and also giving his bishop a potential retreat square to b1 in case of knight to b4. Knight to c7 is played, f4. That's the reason the knight was moved to g5, to get it out of the way of f3. h6, and now knight to f3. And we've seen this before. Instead of taking on e6, the knight retreats back to f3, because an exchange on e6 here, according to Reti, wouldn't be that preferable, because white would get the bishop pair, but white has the space advantage. And when you have a space advantage, you want to avoid trading pieces off. Interestingly, the knight taking on e6 is one of the better lines. It is the computer's move. But we do see with knight f3 anyway. Bit more of a principled move this, I think, than the computer's move. Now here, queen to c8, queen to c2. So with queen c8, there may be the potential to try and trade off this bishop. But we see queen to c2, rook to b8, and now black is trying to start some form of counter-attack on the queen side. So black doesn't really have any activity in the centre, doesn't really have anything going for on the king side, because Tarrasch has managed to restrict his play in both the centre and the king side. So instead he's going to try and start on the queen side. Now here we see f5, bishop d7. You can see this bishop is just getting more and more passive. Bishop f4, developing his last piece into the game. b5, b3, defending the pawn, keeping the centre strong. c5 and d5. So now let's just take, let's play b4, knight e2, a5, and now let's take a look at Tarrasch's position very quickly. Actually, let's play the next few moves first, then look at it. It'll be a bit more instructive then. g4, we see knight to h7, and now h4. And yeah, this is where Reti pauses to look at this position. So he says that Tarrasch's pawn advance is is played for two reasons. One is to generate some form of kingside attack, and the other is to restrict his opponent's ability to move. So Tarrasch has got a very big space advantage, and his opponent can't really move his pieces. This bishop can go to f6 or d7, and that's it. This bishop can't move at all. This knight can't really move. It can go to the edge of the board, or the edge of the board, or the corner of the board, and that's it. It hasn't really got many options. The queen likewise hasn't really got any good that good of places. It can be sitting behind a pawn which is never going to open. There aren't really many options available to black as to where he can move his pieces. Now, we saw before in the Anderson-Paulsen game that in that game, I believe, I'll see if I can quickly pull it up, actually. Duplicate, I believe it was game 3. Yeah, it was game 3, so I'll quickly pull that game up. APGN. So this is the game we saw. And we saw this position in this game where Adolf Anderssen had managed to give his opponent an... Oh, the crop, everything's all off in terms of cropping. Let's... Anderson-Paulsen. So, in this game, Adolf Anderssen had managed to give his opponent this isolated queen pawn on d6. And in isolated queen pawn positions, you have to control the space in front of the pawn. And he did that, and that's best done with a knight. And Anderssen had managed to do that. He managed to get a knight secure on d5, and it can never be removed, but not without a loss of material. And so in this game, Anderssen had the positional advantage, because he had this square under the best control he could, under the ideal amount of control. And so in this game, Anderssen then started to proceed with a kingside attack. Here, Reti comments that it's quite similar here. Just like in the Anderssen game, Anderssen was only able to get a successful attack going on the king side when he had this positional advantage. However, here, Reti hasn't got the positional advantage of a knight in front of a isolated queen pawn, but has got the positional advantage in terms of having a space and center advantage. And Reti comments that an attack on the wings is only really possible when a counter-attack in the center isn't possible. You can only attack on the wings when you have the center under your control, or when the center is very closed. And this attack on the wings is nearly always far more successful if you have a positional advantage. In this instance, the positional advantage is the space advantage that restricts the opponent's pieces. In the Anderssen game, the advantage was having the knight on the square in front of the IQP. So this is why Tarrasch is now able to try and start a bit of a kingside attack. He's able to start considering pushing his pawns up to generate this attack on the wings. Now the black player responds with queen d8, now threatening to take this pawn because there's two attackers and one defender. You see bishop to g3, defending the pawn. a4, hoping for some breakthrough and counterplay on the queen side. So king to h1, rook to a8, and now we see rook a to e1. And Tarrasch gets his rook off this file, which is potentially going to open. And this is because he wants to avoid exchanging rooks. If we'll give him another move. If takes, rook takes a1, rook takes a1, Tarrasch would have the open file, but he would have freed up black's position a little bit more just by exchanging some pieces off, and he doesn't want to do that. So he moves his rook to e1. Then we see knight to e8, covering d6. D6 is attacked by the bishop, and black wants to play bishop f6 to try and get this bishop a bit more active. Here we see knight to f4, bishop to f6, activating the knight, and then we see knight to e6, and this knight can't be taken. And we see now that actually something that's said time and time again, that when you have a really strong position, when you have your pieces very actively placed, when you have a huge space advantage, when you have an attack about to go, there will nearly always be some form of tactical combination. This is what we see, knight to e6. So it's forking the queen and the rook. And this rook is stuck. The queen can move away, but this rook can't move away, so he wouldn't even be in a rush to take it. Now, if he did take this knight, f takes e6, and now this knight can't move. The knight is trapped. It definitely can't go to that. It's a bishop on f6. If it goes there, it'll be taken, and it can't go to here. And it's ready to be taken right now. And also, this pawn is on e6, attacking the bishop. It's a protected passed pawn. It's ready to be pushed up. Well, maybe after this bishop moves, it might be able to be pushed up. Tarrasch's position is just dominating here, and he's not really any material down. He's going to be able to take this knight for sure. So that's why the knight can't really be taken. So instead we see a takes b3, a takes b3, and then queen to b6. Moving out of the way of this attack on the knight. The knight takes on f8, we have king takes f8, and now g5. And this is the final thrust that decides the game. We have h takes g5, h takes g5, knight takes g5, and then we have queen to h2. Eyeing up down here. So this is a mate in one threat, because the rook defends this only escape square. We have king to g8, defending this h8 square. Knight takes g5, bishop takes g5, f6. Now we have g6. If the bishop was to take on f6, then it would have a mate, because this bishop is very well placed. So we have g6, blocking off the bishop and taking away this mating threat. But bishop takes g6 anyway, and here black resigns. And it's mate in 5. So the mate in 5 is knight takes f6, rook takes f6, bishop to h4, queen takes h4, bishop to e6, queen h7, king f8, queen h8, king e7, and rook takes f7 mate. And that's probably the most complicated mating threat that there is. But even in this position, we're currently threatening mate in 1. And after takes, we've got f7 check. Let's say king to here would be queen h8 mate. King to here, then we would have promoting to a queen with mate. So after this bishop taking, black resigned because mate is forced. And so there we have it, our first Petrov's defense, and game number 21, a second game of Tarrasch. Again, Reti reiterating the same points I think we've covered a few times, but offering more and more ideas for this application, in that once the centre is closed, you can start an attack on the wings, and This attack on the wings is nearly always more successful and more justified if you have a positional advantage that is quite long-lasting. In this instance, the positional advantage is the space advantage. In the previous games we saw, the positional advantage was the knight controlling the square in front of an isolated queen pawn. And I am sure we'll see a few other examples of what these lasting positional advantages will be. But there we have it. That's game number 21. And we've got a few more games of Tarrasch. So if you liked this game, please like, comment and subscribe. And I will hopefully see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching.